Well, hello. You're listening to Shaun of the South, brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition of my family dating back to my granddaddy, and by Folklore Brewing and Meadery, quite literally the best brew in Alabama. I'm pleased to announce this upcoming podcast season you're about to hear that we've been recording for the past year, traveling around the U.S. and the Southeast, is now about to be available for your listening pleasure. This episode you're about to hear was recorded in Atlanta. Our special guest, Hearts Gone South, a country western band specializing in classic country, the kind of music your granddaddy listened to. They're based in North Carolina. You don't want to miss them. And later in the show, I tell a story about the first beer I ever had, which happened to be in Atlanta. Let's have a listen.
Late in the evening, and I can see that radio light, and everybody gathers and everybody'd rather be together on a Saturday night. Plates on the table, sister and brother on my right, and everybody's happy, even grumpy old grandpappy, together on a Saturday night. Well, you are listening to Shaun of the South. I'm your host tonight, Shaun Dietrich. We are coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. Special guest tonight, Hearts Gone South from North Carolina, everybody. Records playing low, and the moon is hanging outside. And everybody gathers and everybody'd rather be together on a Saturday night. We are proud to be here. What a lovely town. I love this place. Atlanta, Georgia is going to be beautiful when they finally finish with it. I mean to tell you, this place has been under construction ever since Sherman left. I-285 is the place lovingly known by most and geographical experts in this world as the place where Satan lives. I have roughly spent at least 11 years of my life stuck on 285. Atlanta, Georgia, founded in 1837 at the end of the Western Atlantic Railroad line. It was first named Marthasville in honor of the then governor's daughter. And then it was nicknamed Terminus for the rail location. And then it was changed after that because they're not happy with one name, to the feminine of Atlantic, as in Western Atlantic Railroad line. Today it's the fastest growing city, a hot hub of transportation, not just for the country, but for the entire world. And that is because of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Third World Airport. This airport has the world's busiest and daily and passenger flights, direct flights to Europe, South America, Asia. This place is easily accessible by more than 1,000 international businesses that operate here. And more than 50 countries have representation in this city through consulates, trade offices, and chamber of commerce. And this city is also the banking center of one of the Southeast's most promising cities. It has the third largest concentration of Fortune 500 companies in the country, which means you will see more concentrations of Land Rover and Range Rover autographs in this town than anywhere else in the world. You will also see the world's fewest amount of Kias and Chevettes and Hondas. And I say this because I know a bit about what I'm talking about. My uncle and my aunt live here. I've got family all over here, my cousins, all my cousins. Atlanta experienced unprecedented growth within its time. I remember when there were about 300,000 in the city proper. Today there's about 420,000. The metro population has grown within the last decade from 2.9 million to 4.1 million people. And most of this growth has taken place in Midtown and Buckhead and the outer perimeter, fringing around I-285, the fifth circle of hell. And you can tell that this growth has occurred because a coffee or a latte would have cost you maybe $1.50 back in the day, and today you're looking at roughly the same price it would cost to buy a 3-bedroom Rambler. Now that Atlanta is the capital of the Southeast, the city of the future, with strong ties to its past and strong links to its future. The heritage of the city only enhances these visual elements, bringing to mind the rich history of this place. In the 1800s, the city was nicknamed by reporters as the city too busy to breathe. In the turbulent 1960s, because there were fewer incidents of racial hatred here, Atlanta was nicknamed by reporters as the city too busy to hate. But tonight, in my humble opinion, you could very well call this town the city who was far too busy to attend this show. Why don't you come along with me to see a city of dreams? We'll take a trip to see the cyclorama way down yonder, down in old Atlanta. Let me tell you that Atlanta is the place to be. Cherokee, Clayton, and Old Henry, Rockdale and Douglas, and Cobb and DeKalb, and Fayette, Forsyth, Fulton, Gwinnett, and all of my pals. Where they once held the Olympic Games, when no one ever misbehaves. But most of all, home to the Atlanta Braves. Well, this portion of our show is brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition in my family dating back to my granddaddy, who once said the best cure for idle hands was to build something. So keep your hands sharp with a case knife, because according to my grandmother, there is no sin more grievous than having idle hands. She would take any child with idle hands and send him or her out to the yard to gather firewood or do some sort of busy work. And she herself never had idle hands, especially when a child misbehaved, when her idle hands connected with your idle butt. This portion of our show also brought to you by Tennessee Peanuts. Tennessee Peanuts. Are you feeling tired, anxious, or unhappy? You have frequent bouts of forlorn complacency and existential angst that leaves you exhausted, drained, grumpy, depleted, and downright despondent? Well, try Tennessee Peanut Company's Down Home Peanuts. 10 out of 12 doctors recommend Tennessee Peanuts to aid digestion, increase circulation, and improve well-being overall. Tennessee Peanut Company brings you an array of roasted peanut flavors to suit all your body's essential peanut needs as identified by the American Medical Association. So you can burn your tongue on some Nashville's sweet and spicy peanuts, or satisfy your sinful needs with doubly dipped chocolate peanuts. Enjoy flavors like Cajun Bayou Bites, honey roasted chipotle, traditional salty, sea salt, or cracked pepper. And when you have room in your belly, try some sweet, sweet classic peanut brittle. You can trust me on this, your pancreas will thank you. The Tennessee Peanut Company, for all your peanut needs, open 24 hours of the morning, day, or night, and time of day. Visit the Tennessee Peanut Company at TennesseePeanut.com. And now, if you would, let's bring up here Hearts Gone South, everybody. Hearts Gone South.
sit here on this moody mountain, deep in the backwoods of my mind, turning over and over. There could have been, there should have been, and the why. That won't help this hurting, missing you in my arms tonight. And the world, it'll keep on turning, whether or not I'm crying. Though I'm gonna climb out of this lonely holler, shake off the ache and the chill, catch me a slow rolling boxcar, find a way to cure my ills. So let it roll down the line. It's only a matter of time, for the rumble of this train helps me shake away the pain of the memory of you in my mind. Now I could spend a lifetime trying to figure out why you're gone. I could sit here and stew in this high lonesome feeling, or teach myself a new song, one that has me believing in my worth the way that I believe in yours, one that has me opening up the window when I'm locked behind a closing door. So let it roll down the line. It's only a matter of time, for the rumble of this train helps me shake away the pain of the memory of you in my mind. For the rumble of this train helps me shake away the pain of the memory of you in my mind.
We're going to read you a little bit of our mail sent in to us from listeners all over this fine nation who had nothing better to do than to put pen to paper or finger to keyboard and tell us a little about what they're thinking and what's going on in their life, or to send us a letter asking us to cease and desist under threat of legal consequence. Our first letter comes to us from Peter in South Haven, Michigan. Peter says, "Dear Sean, I have a daughter who's been waiting for your show to come out again. And when it comes out, do you think you could read her letter over the air before you read any other letters? I just know it would mean so much to her. Her name is Elena, and she's had kind of a hard month. She's 10 years old, and she's gotten her first pair of eyeglasses, and it's kind of hard to adjust. She forgets them. She's always losing them, and some people in her class are making fun of her. If you get a chance to read this over the air, please give my daughter Elena a shout out. Thank you so much." Well, dear Elena, this is Sean, your friend, reminding you that there are worse things in life than wearing glasses, although at your age, not many worse things. But I will tell you this to give you a little bit of hope for the future. One day, you are going to be stronger and better because of those eyeglasses you've been wearing. And if not, there's always LASIK surgery. One day you too will be able to make a decision about your own eyesight, whether or not you want a doctor to shoot a laser into your eyeball. Linda from Canton, Texas. Sean, I don't have television anymore. I got rid of it because I don't get many local channels on an antenna. And I don't want cable, and I don't want to stream anything. So I've started listening to podcasts on my phone because it reminds me more of radio days back in the days I grew up. I'm 86 years old. I stumbled on your show by accident when I read an article for your podcast in Southern Living magazine. So I'm already a big fan because I love that magazine. I just wanted to tell you that if you read this over the air, you can consider this a big old hello from your fan in Texas. Thanks a lot. Dear Linda, thank you for the letter. Thank you for the letter. Blair in Birmingham, Alabama. Sean, thanks for the show. I can't wait for your next season to be recorded and released. We've been waiting on pins and needles. Well, actually, not pins and needles, more like pens and pencils. My son is dealing with some health issues, and it's been hard because he's only 14 years old, and it's hard to watch your child suffer. He's living with his mother now, who lives in Tennessee, but he and I listen to podcasts and stay in touch that way by keeping up with the same stuff while he's in treatment with his mom. So if you have a second, would you mind sending a shout out to him from his dad, Blair? His name is Towns. He'll be listening. I appreciate it so much. Your faithful listener, Blair. Well, dear Towns, you heard your old pa, and you heard what he said. Thank you for listening. I want to say that first and foremost, and I speak for everyone here tonight when I say, we hope you get well soon. Cheryl, Nantucket, Massachusetts. Nantucket. Dear Sean, I live in Nantucket. You can insert your limerick here. Although I'm originally from Kansas, so I'm used to living in the country and bucking hay and dealing with horses and such. But here with my husband in Massachusetts, where he's from, it's been a big adjustment for me. I use your show to stay grounded in the old rural days. And even though you're probably a lot younger than I am, I'm 61, I had a funny story I wanted to tell you that maybe you could relate to. See, my husband was coming home from the store a few days ago. The only thing I sent him to get were eggs and coffee. And he did as I said. And after a few days later, we both came down with what we thought was the flu. It was headaches, nausea, you name it. And one morning I realized while I was making coffee that the coffee can was a different color than it normally is. It was orange. And I realized my husband had gotten decaf. Well, we switched to full caffeine and everything went back to normal almost immediately. And it made me think that this might be a story you'd like to tell. Well, dear Cheryl, I took the time to write a limerick for you, and I will read it if I may. There once was a girl from Nantucket who was married to a very fine husband. She sent him to the store and then came home with nausea and flu and a bucket. Marshall from Winnipeg, Canada. Sean, I feel left out because I listen to your show in Canada, and I wonder if you have any Canadian jokes that you can share. You know, if you're gonna be a host of a show like that, you have to be an equal opportunity jokesmith. That's how it works in today's market. So, how about a Canadian joke? Your listener, Marshall. Well, Marshall, on the sixth day, God turned to Archangel Gabriel, and he said to him, "Today I am going to create a land called Canada, and it will be a land of outstanding natural beauty. It shall have tall, majestic mountains, full of mountain goats, and mountain lions, and eagles, and beautiful sparkling lakes, and bountiful with bass and trout. Forests full of elk and moose, and high cliffs overlooking sandy beaches with an abundance of sea life, and rivers that are stocked with salmon." And God said, "I shall make land rich in soil, so as to make the inhabitants prosper, and I shall call these inhabitants Canadians." and they shall be known as the most friendly, generous, and kind-hearted people on the planet Earth. But Gabriel came unto the Lord and said, "But Lord, don't you think you're being far too generous to these Canadians?" And God replied, "Not really, because just wait till you see the neighbors I'm going to give them." Crystal from Eclectic, Alabama. Sean, my mother's birthday is today. She's in the audience tonight. Would you wish her a happy birthday? She's turning 72. Her name is Phyllis. Well, dear Phyllis, from everybody here tonight, happy birthday. Sean in St. Louis. St. Louis. Great name, too. Dear Sean, my name is Sean. And when I was a kid, the first thing I fell in love with was baseball. Now, it was all my dad's fault because he was a baseball man. So I have been a baseball fanatic all my life. Well, Sean, this year my father died. His name was Clarence. It was lung cancer, although he had never smoked in his life. He asked me before he died if I could take some of his ashes and scatter them on the grass of Busch Stadium, where the Cardinals play. Sean, I was afraid to call and ask about this because you know how finicky these stadiums are these days. When you go to a game, you have to be practically strip searched. There's metal detectors, all sorts of things like that. So I didn't think I'd ever be able to do it, even though it was something my dad loved because he loved baseball. I was about to give up when my cousin told me one day that he was going to go to Busch Stadium with his Boy Scout troop to tour the facilities and let all the boys see the locker rooms and all that. Well, I had this idea. I asked my cousin if I could come with him to Busch Stadium, and I didn't tell anyone why I was going. My wife and I, one night, used a Parmesan cheese container and filled it with some of my father's remains. This is not a joke. My story gets even better, Sean, because as I was walking on the field, I removed the shaker from my pocket and I started sprinkling ashes on the field. Someone in the scouts saw me doing it and he asked what I was doing. And so I just simply told him I was keeping a promise. Anyway, a little bit of my dad is now on the grass of Busch Stadium. That's my story. Thank you for the show. Well, Sean, thank you for the letter. And I want to say honestly, may your father's remains lie there and become part of the pH of that soul underneath that fine grass. And may you see him on every television broadcast, throughout every radio broadcast inning. And may you remember that he loves you wherever he is right now. And that's letters from our listeners. Letters from our listeners. Now, if you would, welcome to the stage, Hearts Gone South, everybody. Hearts Gone South.
On this cold Kentucky morning, the sun's about to rise. The birds are softly singing at the dark clouds in the sky. The frost is on the pumpkins left out in the field as I clamber around the cupboard, put together the morning meal. And I'm sitting in the kitchen, the coffee's set to brew, and the kids can't hear the sound of my heart cleaving clear in Kentucky morning that's left me without you. Couldn't sleep a wink last night when I laid down my head. The room was so cold without anyone on your side of the bed. I can still feel your arms around me and your lips on my neck, and it's tearing me apart to know you're never coming back. And I'm sitting in the kitchen, the coffee's set to brew, and no one hears the sound of my heart cleaving clear in two. Breakfast is almost ready, and I don't know what to do on this cold Kentucky morning that's left me without you. Damn, this cold Kentucky morning that's left me without you.
Well, I love this town, I think, primarily because I have a history here. And you love places that you have a history with. It's just natural, I guess. My mother moved us here after my father died when I was 14 years old. And we moved in with my aunt and uncle, who both had horrendous snoring problems. You could hear them from our room because our room was way upstairs in the attic in this triangular-shaped room beneath the rafters, which was so hot you would melt into a puddle of sweat while you were sleeping, and you'd kind of toss over and you'd hear this little squish beneath your shoulder, kind of like you were sleeping on a giant sponge, because this bed had belonged to our great-grandmother, and it was still in the family because nobody could get their mind around getting rid of it. And the rumor was that she had died in that bed. And underneath us, underneath the floorboards, the joists, you could hear this. And it was loud. And it sounded like the second coming of Elvis. And I would lie awake at night, and I would look at the floor, and I would pray for the Lord to take me home. I would wake up in the mornings to the smell of a 10-course breakfast. Every morning of that woman's life, my aunt, she would cook a 10-course breakfast with everything you pleased on the table. It was a long wooden farm table, and it had grits with cheese, that cheap garlic cheese that you get from the grocery store that'll turn your bowels into stone. And there was 4 or 5 different kinds of breakfast meats. There was breakfast sausage. There was link sausage. There was the sausage my uncle had to eat because his cholesterol was through the roof, as if there was any question why. She had eggs, and she cooked her eggs just right. I love the way a rural cook prepares eggs. And this is how they do it. They get an iron skillet that's well seasoned, which means the skillet is older than the cook itself. And then you fill this skillet with 3 fingerfuls, like you're filling a shot glass, of bacon grease. The bacon grease must be older than the person eating breakfast because it's been sitting on a Maxwell House container on the back of the stove ever since Theodore Roosevelt was in office. Once this grease is just a bubbling and ping, 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 making these little ricochets in the pan, at this point, you get the egg, you crack it open into the bubbling grease, then you let the white cook simply by spooning some of the grease onto the white. You do not flip the egg. And when the edges of that yellow golden yolk start to turn just a little bit, you take it up with that spatula and you put it onto the plate, and then and only then do you flip it. If your plate is not loaded with 1/4 inch of grease and the egg sliding around on both sides like it's about to flop off and fall onto the linoleum, you did it wrong. My aunt would cook these eggs like that. Oh. And she would have these strips of bacon that were bigger than pool noodles. And she'd put all that on your plate, and you'd look at her, and it kind of made up for the fact that she snored like a freight train. And then you'd eat all this food, and when it was done, you'd get up, and there'd be seconds and thirds to be had, and you'd go and you'd eat. And so it was during this period of my life that I put on about 14 pounds. Just quite a lot on my little frame. I was a chubby child with red hair and freckles. And my main claim to fame in that time in Georgia was this little church that we went to, right up the road, a Baptist church, had this youth group production where they needed someone to play Elvis Presley. Now, I grew up in a tiny little church, and I sang in church because musical talent runs very thin in Baptist churches, and so I learned how to sing at a very early age, more out of necessity than anything. And so my cousin Ed Lee and I were in this youth group. Every year they put on a big production for the 4th of July. They had these ladies who would dress up in these blue and red leotards, and they would kind of do the Rockettes chorus line, high kicking and all that kind of stuff. Only these women were, well, they were pushing 72. Or maybe they were pulling it. And there was a firework display, and there was a choir number where everybody sang lots of patriotic songs. There was a little band playing John Philip Sousa stuff. And the youth group was going to put on a production of the history of American music. And it was going to start all the way with ragtime, with Scott Joplin. And Johnny Simmons was going to play stride piano. He had been working on a maple leaf rag. And after him, Madge Russo was going to play something on the saxophone. And then I was going to come up to the rock and roll era, and I was going to play none other but Elvis the Pelvis. Now, the screenplay had been written by my cousin Ed Lee, who was not necessarily a child who people wanted their kids hanging around with. Cousin Ed Lee is what we called a wild child. Or if you were in the youth group, you called him fun. Because he was fun. He was the kind of kid who'd walk along the side of the road, and he'd look down and he'd see these cigarette butts, and he'd pick them up, these smoked cigarette butts, and he'd rip off the filter, or if they were unfiltered, he'd just open up the cigarette paper and he'd pour that tobacco into his hand until he had a nice little pile. And then he would go to his Bible and rip out the very first page of Genesis and use that to wrap himself one cigarette. And I would say, Cousin Ed Lee, you're going to hell for doing that. And he'd say, oh, come on. Nobody reads this book anyway. And so he had written a screenplay, and he had included Elvis in his play. of American music, starting with ragtime, going all the way to current rock and roll. And nobody knew, I would venture to say, nobody knew in that church that there was the character Elvis in this church play. And so it was that we put star-studded studs on my jumpsuit, and there was a little red cape on the back, and I wore a scarf, and I wore a flower lei, just like Elvis did in Aloha, Hawaii. And so when I got up on that stage, right after Madge Russo played her saxophone solo, I got up there and I said, "You're a grand old fly, oh, I fly and fly, and forever in peace may you wave. Oh, you're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Oh. Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. And should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag." And I paraded my little tight jumpsuit self off that stage. And one lady grabbed me by the earlobe and she took me to the back in the fellowship hall. And I was excommunicated from every potluck after that. So that was one of my first memories in Atlanta. I think my second memory in Atlanta was when I had my very first beer. And I wish I could tell you I was just a good boy and that I had my very first beer when I was 21 years of age. But those were different times that I grew up in, different times. And I had my first beer when I was 14 years old. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to any young people listening. I do not recommend ever touching or consuming anything but Ovaltine. But it's true. There was this place way out in the country that they called the Ramblin' Rose. And it was what was known by the Baptist people as a sin hole. A sin hole. Now, there are very many different types of establishments in this world that are mostly known as joints. There's a barbecue joint, there's a burger joint, there is a beer joint. But you must be really lewd and lascivious to qualify as a sin hole. And this place was a sin hole, the Ramblin' Rose. It did not serve anything food-wise. All they did was play music and have beer. And of course, as a Baptist child, we were the kinds of people who did not believe in all these racy activities, such as premarital relations with the opposite sex, because this might lead to dancing. And so, my cousin Ellie and I had to go visit this place because curiosity, being a child, is an adventure, and having adventures is dangerous. There's really no difference between an adventure and an ordeal or a disaster except your perspective. So my cousin Ellie and I got Wally Jordan's sister, older sister, to drive us out into the country. We paid her $2 in gas. And she drove us out to the Ramblin' Rose, and as she dropped us off, she looked at us and said, "This never happened." And we said, "Okay." And she drove away in her mother's Lincoln Continental, and there we were, in the middle of the woods, in front of this block building called the Ramblin' Rose, which had absolutely no identifying markers that this was a beer joint or a sin hole, except for a tiny little sign that said Pabst Blue Ribbon was served here. Cousin Ellie said, "Well, I guess we're here, we might as well go see what's going on." So instead of going inside, we went to the little window in the side of the joint. And it had bars along the side so that nobody could bust in. God knows why anyone would want to bust in. There wasn't nothing in here worth taking. And we looked inside and we saw this band. They were playing songs like, "Your cheating heart will make you weep. You cry and cry and try to sleep." My cousin Italy looked at me and said, "This is awesome." because we had never seen anybody sing a song about such things. And there were people in front of the stage, we could see through that cloudy, foggy, smoke-laden window, who were holding each other very closely, and they were dancing. Dancing. Dancing was prohibited among my people because it would awaken carnal desires. The only problem was Cousin Italy and I were 14 years old. Our carnal desires had been awakened long ago, and we're sitting on the corner of the bed, dressed and ready for school. Cousin Italy walked to that front door, and he put his hand on that golden doorknob, and he pushed forward. It was a bent iron metal door, and it just scraped open, and he walked inside, and I could smell cigarette smoke and stale yeast in the air. I said, Italy, don't do that. And he was already gone. So I walked inside after him, and I shut the door. We walked right up to the bar. We sat down. The woman was behind the bar looking at us. She was tall and lean with a very, very scrawny neck and bleached blonde hair that was fried, dyed, and laid to the side. My cousin Italy said, we're here today because this is my cousin and he just turned 21. He looked back at her and he said, we would like for him to have his first legal beer. Well, she looked at us and she started to laugh, and her laugh sounded like a pack of Virginia Menthol Misty Slims. She said to my cousin Italy, she said, you got any ID? And he said, about what? She said, if you're 21, then I am Raquel Welch. She said, I'm sorry, but you can't be in here. You got to get out now. This place is only for adults, and you are definitely not an adult. My cousin Italy said, no, wait. Now look, we just want to know what this place is about. We want to listen to the music. We just want to hang out for a little while. Can we do that? She said, I could get in a lot of trouble for this. He said, we're Baptists, ma'am. We're Baptists. Can't we just hang out for a little bit and listen to that band, that wonderful band? She said, all right, but you sit in the very, very corner. So my cousin Ellie and I moved over to the very, very corner. We took 2 stools and we sat down. And we watched the band play. And they were good. They were good. They were playing songs like, I tried so hard, my dear, to show that you're my every dream. Yet you're afraid each thing I do is just some evil scheme. A memory from your broken past keeps us so far apart. Why can't I free your doubtful mind and melt your cold, cold heart? And we just watched in transfixed hypnotization. It was marvelous. There's a special kind of music heard in beer joints all over the U.S. that is unique unto itself. It's an American music that is far more American than Madge Russo playing anything on her saxophone. And we were so glad to be there. And then the woman came over behind the bar and she saw us sitting there and she said, look, I feel bad just letting you sit here without asking if you want anything to drink. Would you like a water? We do have some soda. Would you like some Coca-Cola or anything? Cousin Lee said, listen, I want to ask you a question. She said, okay, and leaned on the bar. She seemed so much older than she really was. She might have been in her 30s, but to me she looked like she was pushing 55. She said, what? Cousin Lee said, my cousin here is a very, very good singer, and he sings in church all the time. I have a proposition for you. Would you let him get up and sing a song? She looked at us. She said, well, I don't know. I have to ask Luke. It's his band. He looked at me and he nodded. I looked at Ed Lee. I said, what are you doing? He said, come on. The whole point of life is to make memories. Luke came over to me and he said, is it true? Are you a Are you a singer? I said, yes, sir, I am. He said, you'd like to sing a song with the band? I said, I don't know. And Cousin Eddie Lee elbowed me. He said, go on, do it. I said, yeah, sure. He said, all right, what do you want to do? Well, I couldn't think of anything. And so when it was time for me to go up onto the stage, he welcomed me up onto this little plywood stage with these steps, and there's all this sound equipment scattered around me, these little wedge monitors and these snake nests of chords. And I asked them to play something in the key of E. And I sang, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toil, and snares, I have already come. 'Twas grace that leads me safe thus far, and grace shall lead me home. And when I got to that final verse that every congregation sings, I sang it with all my heart because I don't know any other way to do it. I hadn't been trained otherwise. And I sang, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've known less days to sing and praise than when we first begun. And when I finished my song, nobody was dancing and nobody was drinking. They were all just sort of looking at me with these numb looks on their faces like, what just happened here? And for a brief moment in time, that whole room ceased feeling like a sin hole. And it just felt like a normal place on planet Earth. There really is no difference between a Bible joint and a beer joint. And when I finished singing, I came back to the bar, and the woman who had been tending bar that entire time looked at me, and I could see these furrows cut down her dry cheeks where tears had been. And she said, that was lovely. You know, I haven't heard that song in a long time. She said, I want to tell you something, but I am going to do something for you. And that woman reached underneath the bar. She got a pint glass. She filled it halfway with Pabst Blue Ribbon. She set it in front of me and she said, you tell anybody about this, I will kill you. My cousin Eddie Lee and I split that Pabst Blue Ribbon, and we were asked to promptly leave, and we did. We floated on a cloud for the rest of the day. And the next morning I woke up just as soon as my aunt and uncle had quit snoring, and I heard the sound of bacon crackling in the skillet. And I walked downstairs sleepy with messy hair and eyes that were crusted shut. And I saw my cousin Eddie Lee sitting at the dining room table, and he looked wrong. Something was very wrong. His eyes were puffy and pink, and his nose was swollen with snot, and he'd been crying. And he looked at me and he shook his head and said, don't come in here. But it was too late. My aunt looked at me and she was wielding a wooden spoon in her hand like a weapon. She said, I want you to tell me something, son, and I want you to tell me the truth. Did you go to that sin hole across the county line last night? And she held that spoon high. And I looked at her and I said, 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. And she looked at me and said, you are grounded until you're 44 years old. That's our Sophia, that's our show, brought to you by Case Knives, Tradition of My Family, and Folklore Brewing and Meadery, the best brew in Alabama. Special thanks to Kim Scotts, John Rainey, Sylvia Santamore, Aaron Peters, and Alan Wright. And how about this good band we had here, Hearts Gone South, everybody. Hardly a refuge can afford, striving alone to face temptation. So let me tell you, where could I go but to the Lord? Ooh, where could I go? Lord, where could I go? Seeking for refuge for my soul, needing a friend to tell me to the end. Oh, where could I go but to the Lord? Yeah, that's our Sophia tonight. Thank you very much.